This is a game I've been working on for roughly 6 months called Ratshot. Back in September, I released a video talking about the game for the first time, and quite a bit of stuff has happened since then, beyond just what I've added to the game. We'll get to that stuff in a bit. The biggest change though has been the amount of people who know about the game. The last devlog did way better than I expected, and you guys left a ton of nice and super funny comments, with some really helpful feedback that I'll talk about later. You guys are all super rad, thank you. But some of you might not have seen that first video, so let's quickly just get everyone caught up on what the game is and what I've added. So Ratshot is a quick, movement-based platformer about a fugitive rat in New York City. The basic move kit is a boost into the air, a really quick ground pound, an attack, and a slide. The game currently has 3 levels, a tutorial, the first level you guys saw last time, and a newer, much better second level. The first level needs to be redone, but the tutorial and second level might honestly make it to the final game, with some tweaks and changes after more playtesting. I also mentioned last time that I need to find ways to make the game more unique, and I think I found a way to help with that issue. NPCs. Action-packed games like this can get pretty boring without some sort of change of pace or gameplay, and I think reading goofy dialogue is a way better solution to this problem than like shoehorning in puzzles or something. It'll also give the game just so much more life. I love it when games throw the player into all kinds of fun shenanigans and stuff. It makes the game feel more like a special experience and leads to a lot more just memorable moments. I probably won't be able to do too much and they'll be entirely optional, but I think it'll lead to some fun reactions. I've also just been working on a lot of UI stuff. We got a pause menu, an options screen, and a new title screen with a cool interactive background. Wow. However, beyond all that, there's also been one big issue that's been causing me to kind of procrastinate working on the game. There's an issue in the game right now with combat. I talked about it a little bit in the last video, but it turns out I was only scratching the surface. I set up with this knife slice last time as a basic attack, along with turning the 2 main movement options into attacks. You can drill into enemies to kill them while getting a boost, and do the same thing with the gunshot. At first I tried to just make some arenas with the enemies I had to get a feel for what the combat should be like, but it just didn't feel as fun as a regular game. The only enemies that are actually enjoyable to fight are the trash bags, because they're basically just moving punchy bags and don't really get in your way. But the more I tried to add actual attacks to the enemies, the less fun they became. You would often have to kill them in just really awkward positions to avoid their attacks, and dying to them often just felt unfair. I tried prototyping this bigger mini-boss type enemy, but it just went with the pattern of feeling more complicated and therefore less fun. The only combat related thing in this game that was fun was killing the enemy that required the least amount of actual combat to kill.
Guys, I think we're cooked.
Now you may be thinking to just remove combat from the game and focus on the movement, but if I do that, then how am I gonna add boss fights? I'm not gonna make a game without boss fights, okay? That goes against like my moral code as a game dev. Plus I already made all this stuff for combat, it's not going away. Plus adding combat elements would shake up the gameplay much more and make level design easier. There could be little arenas with enemies you need to kill to progress, and that's why I did these skull blocks, but I can't because combat in this game just fundamentally doesn't work. And I mean, look how fast this character goes. When you're moving that fast, you have no time to react and dodge to the hazards around you. As Kendrick Lamar once said, but what if I told you it doesn't even stop there? This animation still sucks! As I mentioned earlier, the first video got a lot of feedback and ideas from people in the comments. At first they all seemed to just have pretty different ideas of where to take the game and things to change, until I looked at the comments from a different angle. Instead of just trying to follow exactly what the feedback was saying, I tried to think about what the core issue this offered idea was attempting to fix. After that, I was able to go through the comments again and come up with 2 main issues that need to be addressed. The knife in the current attack animation comes out of nowhere and isn't used in any other animation, so it just feels off and a bit confusing. The gun held by the main character, despite being a signature weapon, is never used as a weapon. The player has a gun, but there's no parts in the game where you're using it as a gun. Which leads me to the title of this video. The character design is going against the gameplay of the game, and it's driving me crazy. The first issue could just be solved easily if I could just make a new animation, but as you guys saw, I for some reason just can't make this animation look right. While jabbing motions like a punch or kick are easier to animate, they just don't feel right in game. The rat is this nimble character who's often in the air, and direct jabs just feel much better when they're heavy and on the ground. I need to find some sort of slicer swing that I can use for the player attack, or maybe even 2 if I'm feeling fancy. Some people suggested using his tail as a whip to attack, but like, if I couldn't animate this, I'm not going to be able to do all that. Or maybe I could just solve both issues at once by having him do some sort of shotgun blast, but the thing is, I'm worried that would blend in with the shooting that's already used as a movement option and really confuse new players. For now, I'm just gonna keep it as a slice since it functions the same gameplay wise, and I also just might be going insane and nobody actually cares. So with that first issue out of the way, we have our second one, which is the gun not being used as a gun. I went back to the idea of just letting the player shoot, but I found it just didn't work with the rest of the gameplay. Games like Metroid and Cuphead are able to get away with using guns in a platformer because of their slower pacing, and just the fact that Samus and Cuphead aren't moving a mile a minute. Sure, it led to some fun combos, but if I were to actually try and make these enemies pose a challenge, it would just be a messier version of the combat from before. And also, with the shooting being aimable like this, it would be a nightmare for controller support. So what now? Do I need to completely redesign this character to fit this weird gameplay style I've created? I mean, don't get me wrong, this rushed character design has caused me a lot of pain. I have no idea what's happening with the entire lower half of his body. But people like him. I kinda like him, so if solving these issues mean replacing him with some other lame dude, then I will simply have to find another way. I also just don't want to redraw 42 sprites. And find another way I did. So obviously this helps with the issue of the player not being able to shoot enemies, but it also helps with the bigger issue, combat. Instead of trying to cram shooting and combat into the movement-based platforming, I can have some levels have shoot-'em-up sections where the player could just go nuts. I'll still use the basic platforming enemies in combat built before, but treat it more like Neon White, where the enemies are more level elements than actual threats you have to fight. Then for when I want boss fights or enemy arenas, I can just bring the player into the shoot-'em-up area. And on top of all of that, guess who has experience making a shoot-'em-up game? For once, I won't be working in some crazy new genre that I have no idea how to code. And if the game is a mix of a platformer and a shoot-'em-up, that'll make it stand out even more, which was an issue from earlier. It's perfect! Except for one issue. What if the player does not like shoot-'em-ups? This is the main issue with kind of just flip-flopping between genres. The player might just simply like one part of the game more than the other. Luckily, there are ideas I have to help this issue. For one, notice how I said shoot-'em-up sections. There may be some levels that are pretty much entirely shoot-'em-up, but at some parts of the game, I might give the player a choice. Imagine they're going through the level like normal and they see a bike, and if they take the bike, they can go to the bike game mode and do the rest of the level that way. And I can still make boss fights in the platforming sections, combat or no combat. Plenty of platformer games with no combat have found ways to do really good boss fights without adding any real combat mechanics. Another issue is that just a shoot-'em-up on its own isn't very interesting, and they usually need some sort of gimmick to be notable. Luckily, I have one. The way it'll work is this. Behind the player are a bunch of police cars that'll get closer over time. However, by holding down the dash button, you can start speeding up, which lowers your actual movement speed but increases your miles per hour. This makes it so the player will have to dodge through enemy projectiles while also finding spots where they can focus on increasing their speed to avoid getting caught by the police. I think it's pretty neat, but I haven't playtested it with too many people yet, so who knows. I'd really like to hear your guys' thoughts on it in the comments. My plan is to kind of play it by ear, add it a lot or a little depending on how many playtesters enjoy it. Speaking of playtesting, my current goal for the game right now is to get just a small demo out for the community to try. That's why I've been working on stuff like UI. It's so I can release a version of the game for you guys to try for free and maybe, I don't know, speedrun or something. I probably won't be out for a while because there's still a lot that needs to be polished up, and I still need to remake that first level, but just know that that's the next step. I'll probably post about it here when it comes out, but if you really don't want to miss it or want to get it extra early or something, you can check out the Discord or Twitter. Or Blue Sky, I guess, I don't care. As for when the actual game is releasing, I have no idea! But anyways, yeah, as always, feel free to leave any feedback or ideas you have in the comments. Thanks.